right, good morning everybody. So today I'm going to show you how to make 6 basic Zentangle patterns. So here they are, and I'm going to show you how to make them more complex so they give you some more visual interest. So our 6 basic patterns are the grid, scale, stripes, bubbles. So that's the little circles. I know it's a little more difficult to see. We got starburst, and then organic. So you're going to create your own patterns by combining these basic patterns with each other and the elements of art to make more complex designs. So here's how it works. So you start with your basic, and I'll show you this again in a minute. You start with your basic, so like a scale, and then you got to add an extra. So you can just choose one of these from up here, or you can choose one of the elements of art like value or color. So I've taken this, and all I did was add on a little bump right here. And by doing that for each scale, that already looks way more complex than this one, right? So it looks more fancy. Now, the next part, I just added some stripes. So all I did was in the middle here, I just added a little bit of stripe. And this looks way more complex than that one, right? So it looks more fancy. And then the last thing, I just added a dot or like a bubble, right? And I just added some dots in there. So this looks like a really super complex fancy pattern that took me forever, and it really didn't. Same thing with this basic stripe here. So I just took a basic stripe, and then I added on some scales, and then I added on some dots in a pattern, and then I just added on some lines in a pattern as well. And this looks significantly more complex than that one. So now you're going to create your own pattern, starting with each of the basic patterns and adding at least 3 more items to create a new and more complex pattern. If you feel comfortable just going ahead and getting started on your own, go ahead and go do this, and you don't have to watch the rest of the video. If you would like a little bit more extra help, then stick around for the video, and I will show you step by step how to do each one of the different basic patterns. So here I've got my basic patterns. I've got grid. I'm going to show you how to make the scales, stripes, bubbles and dots, starburst and organic. So for the grid, I just drew the lines this way. I drew the lines that way. And I got to make 3 basic changes, right? So my first basic change that I'm going to do, I'm going to draw another stripe, but I'm going to make these stripes go diagonal. So I'm going to cut these into triangles. And even by just doing that, it already looks more complex than it did before. And that was just one small change. So my first small change was stripes. Now my second small change, I'm not going to do it for every single one. I'll show you the finished thing in a minute. I'm just going to add a dot. I'll do one row. I'm just going to add a dot into the top right corner of each one of these. So I would go through and I would do all of them. And like I said, I'll show you in a second. So my first change, stripes. My second change, a dot in the top right corner. And then my third change, I'm going to do some more stripes, and I'm going to rotate my paper. That is a trick for helping to make this kind of stuff easier. It is perfectly okay to move your paper to a more comfortable position, right? So now I've added in my 3 changes. I did a stripe, a dot, and some more stripes. So now if I continued that pattern on, it would look like this one. And this is a significantly more complex pattern than just having a straight grid. Now for scales, sometimes students have a hard time just making the scales to start with. And there's a couple tricks to it. Go slow, that tends to help. And you're just gonna start with one bump or arch. And then start in that same spot, kind of come up and go down and over to make another bump. You're gonna make the whole row. And try to keep them all the same size, but if they're not quite all exactly the same size, that's okay. Now, here's what makes it look like scales, okay? On this next row, you're not gonna start in here and add it on. You're gonna start in the middle. So you're gonna start in the middle, and you're gonna make the next row of bumps, and make sure that each one of these touches the middle of the one underneath it. Right? And then same thing again. So on the next layer, you got to touch the middle of the layer before it. And if you go kind of slow and steady on this, your scales will look more even, and it's a little bit easier than if you try to do it fast. If you try to do it really fast, it tends to get really messy looking. Okay, so there's my scales. Now I do need to add something else on here. Remember, I got to make 3 changes. So I think I'm going to do a partial starburst, and I'm going to add in the starburst starting from like right here. Now, since this scale doesn't go all the way down, I'm not going to close it right here. I'm going to leave it open as if it was going all the way down a little lower. And then on my next row, I would go like this. So I'm not going to follow the whole thing. I'll show you the finished thing in the end. So my first change is adding in a slight starburst. My next change that I'm going to do is to add on some dots. So I'm going to add on some dots on either side here like this. So I'm going to add in some dots. So I have my starburst, I have my dots, and now I need to make one more change, and I think I'm going to do stripes. And again, I'll show you what it would look like if I did this with every single one in just a second. But so that's just 3 small changes, and I can color in, like if I wanted to, I could color in some of these stripes and not others, or I could color in this whole section. And that could add another layer of interest too. So you can see this is what it would look like if I continued that pattern on for the rest of the scales. And it looks significantly more complex than just the regular scale. So now we're going to move on to stripes. So stripes can go in any direction. You know, they could be stripes going this way, they could be stripes going that way, whatever you want. So for my first change, I'm going to actually make another stripe right next to the original one. So now I'm going to have, it looks like it's thick, thin, thick, thin, thick, thin, right? So that's one change. I just added another stripe. Now my second change I'm going to do is I'm going to add in dots. And like I said, I already have this one finished, so I'm just going to do one, but I would continue it on there. And then, so I've got 1 change is my extra stripe, 2 changes is the dots, and now I'm going to add in an organic little swirly thing. So that's going to be my third change, is to add on a little swirly thing. So if I continued that pattern all the way across, this is what it would look like. And you can see if, you know, especially in Zentangles, you're not going to have square edges all the time. So if you get to the edge, just show, you know, part. So like if I continued this on, I would only see part of this shape, right? So you can just cut it off like that. All right, so that's for stripes. Now for bubbles and dots, for bubbles, I tend to start with a big circle, and then I fill in with slightly smaller circles, and then I continue to get smaller and smaller and fill in all those little areas. Now you don't have to fill every single dot with something. You don't have to fill every single space with something. I mean, if you wanted to, you could, but because this is your pattern, it's your idea. So you're coming up with your own visual interest here. So there's all kinds of different stuff you could do. So here's my dots. I started big and I got smaller and smaller and smaller as I filled in. Now my first change, I'm just going to do it to the bigger dots, and you'll see in a second. So my first change, I'm just going to add in a circle, so another kind of bubble on the inside of this. Now and I would do it to all the big ones. Now my second change, I'm actually going to add in a starburst pattern. So I make a plus, and then I make an X, and I make sure that the line for the X goes through the center of the plus. So that would be my second change, making a starburst. Now my third change, I'm gonna add in a scale into here like this. And like I said, if you need to rotate the paper, that is totally acceptable to do. Now you could, like I've said before, you could fill in different areas to add more visual interest. So like for me, maybe I would fill in this part and then fill in that part and then fill in this part and fill in that part and make a pattern that way as well. But once I added in all those circles and starbursts and scales to all of my large dots, then it looks like that. So now for starburst again, like I said, we're gonna start with drawing a plus. And then we're going to draw an X and just make sure that it crosses through the center of that plus like that. And now we got to still, again, make 3 changes to this. So I'm just going to do 1. And then I'll show you what it looks like finished. So I'm going to add on a stripe. So I'm going to add on a stripe right here. And this is where rotating the paper becomes really important. I'll go ahead and go all the way around with this one. So I'm rotating the paper and making sure my stripe is on the same side each time I do this. So that's my first change. Now my second change, I'm going to go ahead and add dots again because I think it looks cool. And then for my third change, I'm going to do another stripe. And I'm going to rotate the stripe because the Starburst is like a pizza. You want to cut it like a pizza slice, and then you want each slice to match all the way around. So what I mean by that is, see how, I started with stripes going this way, and then if I rotate it, those match, and I rotate it, those match. But it starts to look like a spider web. So those stripes are kind of going around in a circle. They're not all going in straight rows in one direction. They rotate around that central point. So really it's just that extra stripe all the way around, the dots all the way around, and then stripe, and then rotate it, stripe, rotate it, stripe, rotate it, stripe, right? And once you go all the way around, then it looks all fancy. Now for the organic, these can be really fun to add on to the outside. Things tend to look better when you put them in groups of 3. So I could start with something that looks like that. I could add on, for my first change, I'm going to add on scales. So I could add on a scale going all the way around like that. For my second change, maybe I want to add on a stripe and have a stripe sticking out right here. Going all the way around. And then for my third change, I could add on a dot onto the end of each of my stripes. And that looks significantly more complex than just this little simple thing here. So here's what it would look like if I did it to all 3. So, it's a combination of adding in all your extras. And then you do want to spend some quality time filling in areas to make it look even more visually appealing. So having some areas where it's light, some areas where it's dark does tend to help make things look more interesting. So that is how you start with your 6 basic patterns. And just by adding on 3 more little extras, making those patterns look super complex. All right, thanks everybody. Now go try it.